5th, 2000, a completely normal day, or at least, it started that way. People walked into work, turned on their computers, and opened their emails like they always did. Nothing seemed unusual, but within just a few hours, everything fell apart. Computers started freezing, files were disappearing, entire systems were getting wiped out. In just one office building, over 13,000 infections were detected. And before anyone could understand what was happening, the damage had already spread across the entire world. Billions of dollars lost, all from a single message. I love you. It sounds harmless, even comforting, but this was actually one of the most dangerous computer worms ever created. The virus spread by disguising itself as a love letter. An email would arrive in your inbox, usually from someone you knew. The message was simple. Kindly check the attached love letter coming from me. And attached to it was a file named Love Letter for You, TXTVBS. But here's where things got dangerous. Most computers at the time hid file extensions by default. So instead of seeing the full name, users only saw Love Letter for You, TXT. It looked like a harmless text file. So people clicked it, and the moment they did, the virus activated. Behind the scenes, the file wasn't a text document at all. It was a Visual Basic script, a type of file that could run commands on your computer automatically. As soon as it opened, the worm went to work. It began copying itself all over the system, hiding inside folders and replacing personal files like music, photos, and other data. It also modified parts of the Windows registry, making sure it stayed active even after restarting the computer. Then it moved on to email. Using Microsoft Outlook, the virus automatically sent copies of itself to every single contact in the user's address book. Not just a few people, everyone. That meant every infected computer created dozens, sometimes hundreds, of new infections within minutes. The spread was exponential and nearly impossible to stop in time. At the same time, the worm created another file called win-bugsfix.exe. Despite the name, it wasn't fixing anything. It was secretly collecting passwords from the infected system. And there was another reason this virus was so powerful. It was written in a very simple scripting language. That meant anyone could open the file, read the code, and even modify it. As a result, multiple versions of the virus started appearing, making the outbreak even harder to control. Now, this wasn't the first email worm ever created. A year earlier, a virus known as Melissa also spread through email, but it had limits. It only sent itself to the first 50 contacts in your list. The ILOVEYOU virus removed that limit completely, and that one change made all the difference. Within hours, it had spread across continents, shutting down email systems in businesses, governments, and major organizations. Some companies were even forced to completely disconnect their email servers just to stop the spread. Eventually, investigators traced the virus back to the Philippines. 2 individuals were identified, Onel de Guzman and his friend Reonel Ramones. Guzman had previously been working on a program designed to steal internet passwords as part of a college thesis. When his proposal was rejected, he dropped out. The virus he created was very similar to that original idea. Both men were arrested and investigated, but there was a problem. At the time, there were no specific laws in the Philippines that made creating or spreading malware illegal. Because of that, all charges were dropped and they were released. In response to the attack, countries around the world quickly began introducing new cybersecurity laws. Companies also started improving email security, antivirus software, and user awareness. And that brings us to the most important part of this story. The ILOVEYOU virus wasn't the most advanced piece of malware. It didn't use complex hacking techniques. It didn't break through firewalls. Instead, it relied on something much simpler: human curiosity. People opened the file because it looked personal, because it came from someone they trusted, because it said, "I love you." And even today, that same tactic is still used. Scams, phishing emails, fake messages. They all rely on the same idea, getting you to click before you think. So the next time you get a message that seems a little too interesting or a little too urgent, take a second, because sometimes the most dangerous threats don't look dangerous at all.
Crippling cyber attack has businesses around the world on high alert. The ransomware known as WannaCry.
I want to move on to the other developing story this morning, the global cyber attack.
The National Security Agency developed this software.
WannaCry. And this wasn't just another cyber attack. This thing went global, fast. We're talking hundreds of thousands of computers taken down in just days. Hospitals, businesses, entire systems just locked. And the craziest part? This whole thing was basically built using stolen government hacking tools. So to understand WannaCry, you have to understand the two tools behind it. Eternal Blue, Double Pulsar. Now the National Security Agency, the NSA, has a ton of advanced cyber tools, and Eternal Blue was one of their best. A lot of Windows computers at the time used something called SMBv1. It's basically what lets your computer communicate with things like printers, networks, and other devices. But buried deep in that system, there was a flaw, a tiny one. It didn't properly check certain incoming data. So if someone knew what they were doing, they could send fake data to your computer and trick it into running code inside the kernel, the deepest level of your system. Basically, full control. And that's what Eternal Blue did. Now think of it like this. Eternal Blue is what kicks your door open. Then comes Double Pulsar. That's what walks in, sets up shop, creates backdoors, and lets someone actually run commands inside your system. Together, they're insanely powerful. So these tools were created by a group called the Equation Group, which is widely believed to be tied to the NSA. But then another group shows up, the Shadow Brokers. In 2016, they somehow hacked the Equation Group and stole these tools. At first, they tried to sell them. Nobody really believed them. So in April 2017, they just dropped everything online for free. They even said it was partly in protest of UE's actions in Syria under Donald Trump. So now, suddenly, some of the most powerful cyber weapons in the world are just out there. Anyone can use them. And then things got worse. On May 8th, a cybersecurity company called RiskSense released more details on how Eternal Blue actually worked, which sounds helpful, except they also showed how to trigger it. And 4 days later, May 12th, 2017, WannaCry is released. It's believed to have been created by Park Jin-hyuk, part of North Korea's Lazarus Group. There's even evidence suggesting parts of it may have been developed while he was in China. But here's what made WannaCry different. It didn't need you to click anything. No email, no download, no mistake. It just spread, automatically, from one computer to another, across networks, across countries. Once it got into your system, it locked everything, encrypted your files, and then you'd see a message telling you to pay around $600 in Bitcoin to get your data back. There was even a Contact Us button, which led to a page that didn't really help. And a lot of people who paid didn't get their files back anyway. This thing hit everywhere. Estimates say around 200,000 to 300,000 computers got infected. But one of the worst hits was in the UK. The National Health Service got wrecked. Ambulances couldn't use GPS. Hospitals lost access to systems. Around 19,000 appointments were canceled. They estimated about $92 million in damage just from that alone. Globally, around $4 billion. And somehow, the attackers only made about $140,000. Now here's where things get really strange. Inside the virus code, there was this random web address, and the virus would check it. If the site didn't exist, then it kept spreading. If the site existed, then it stopped. Nobody really knew why. Then comes this guy, Marcus Hutchins. He's a security researcher from the UK. At the time, he's literally on vacation. He gets sent the virus to analyze it, starts digging through the code, and keeps seeing that same domain over and over. So he checks it. It's not registered, so he just buys it. And somehow, that stops the virus. Seriously. The moment that domain went live, WannaCry started shutting itself down because the condition it was checking for was suddenly true. It's one of the most accidental saves in cybersecurity history. But by then, the damage was already done. Most people never got their files back. Microsoft rushed out updates to patch the vulnerabilities used by Eternal Blue and Double Pulsar, but a lot of systems were already hit. Governments later blamed North Korea. The FBI even put out a warrant for Park Jin-hyuk, but he's never been caught. And then, one last twist. In 2018, Marcus Hutchins, the guy who helped stop WannaCry, gets arrested in the US. Turns out, years earlier, he helped create a banking malware called Kronos. He gets hit with multiple charges after being detained at DEF CON in Las Vegas. But in 2019, the judge basically says, yeah, but you also helped stop one of the biggest cyber attacks ever. So he gets a very light sentence. Just 1 year of supervised release. Then he goes back to the UK. So yeah, WannaCry isn't just a virus. It's stolen government tools, a mysterious hacker leak, a global outbreak, and a guy accidentally stopping it by buying a random website. And the hero of the story, not exactly a hero, more like an anti-hero. So here's where things get crazy. Pegasus was one of the first pieces of malware that could seriously go after Apple devices, not just Android or Windows. And that's a big deal, because Apple's system, iOS, is usually locked down tight. Think of it like this. Windows is kind of like a wooden house. It works, but it's easier to break into if you know what you're doing. iOS, on the other hand, that's more like a stone castle. It's closed off, heavily controlled, and way harder to get inside. But Pegasus, it found a way in. At first, it used basic tricks, phishing links, those sketchy messages trying to get you to click something. But over time, it evolved. It started exploiting tiny flaws in things like image processing, basically hidden weaknesses in how phones handle pictures or messages. That allowed it to sneak in through apps like iMessage, SMS, even WhatsApp, sometimes without you clicking anything at all. And here's the wild part. Normally, if you want to install something outside Apple's system, you have to jailbreak your phone, which means breaking Apple's security protections. Pegasus didn't need you to do that. It would jailbreak your phone for you, silently in the background, just so it could install its own spying tools. Now, this whole thing might have stayed hidden if it wasn't for one person, a human rights activist named Ahmed Mansour. In 2016, he got a message from someone claiming they had proof of torture in UAE prisons, but instead of clicking the link, he got suspicious, so he sent it to researchers at Citizen Lab. That decision exposed everything. Researchers worked with a security company called Lookout and reverse engineered the link. That's when they discovered Pegasus, created by NSO Group. Once Apple found out, they moved fast. Within days, they released an update, iOS 9.3.5, and patched the vulnerabilities completely. Now officially, Pegasus was supposed to be used for fighting crime and terrorism. That's what governments claimed. But in reality, that's not how it was used. Leaks later showed that thousands of people were being targeted. Journalists, activists, politicians, lawyers, many of them just speaking out about basic human rights. At one point, there were reports of around 50,000 potential targets. This led to lawsuits. In 2019, Meta, which owns WhatsApp, sued NSO Group and won millions in damages. Then, in 2021, Apple filed its own lawsuit. Meanwhile, NSO had been trying to sell Pegasus to governments around the world, even offering it to US agencies. Some turned it down because it was just too expensive, but others didn't. And that's where things get darker. There are real-world cases tied to Pegasus that are, honestly, disturbing. Take a journalist in Mexico named Cecilio Pineda. He reported on corruption and organized crime. He had already survived one assassination attempt. Then, in 2017, he was shot and killed. His attackers were never found, and his phone disappeared from the scene. Years later, leaks revealed he had been a target of Pegasus. Another case, Alaa al-Siddiq, a political activist from the UAE. She spoke out about democracy and human rights. She moved abroad for safety, first to Qatar, then to the UK. But in 2021, she died in what was reported as a car accident. Later, it was revealed her phone had been infected with Pegasus. And then there's Jamal Khashoggi, a journalist who criticized the Saudi government and wrote for the Washington Post. In 2018, he walked into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul and never came out. He was killed inside. Investigations later connected Pegasus to people close to him. His inner circle had been targeted and monitored. So yeah, this isn't just some tech story. This is about real people. Even after lawsuits, bans, and global backlash, Pegasus didn't just disappear. New versions are still being developed. Governments still use tools like it, and reports suggest versions of this kind of spyware were still active as recently as 2024. So when people ask why Pegasus is considered one of the scariest pieces of malware ever made, it's not just because of what it can do. It's because of how it's been used. This is the infamous YouAreAnIdiot virus, more accurately known as the Offiz Trojan. It was linked to a prank site called YouDon'tKnowWhoIam.org, which appeared around November 2002, though some believe it showed up even earlier through shady ads. And like a lot of early internet traps, all it took was one click. Back then, the internet was evolving fast. Websites were becoming interactive, thanks to JavaScript and Adobe Flash. That meant they could play animations, sounds, and in this case, completely mess with your browser. When you opened the site, it didn't seem that bad at first. You'd see a simple animation, smiley faces flashing black and white, chanting, "You are an idiot. Ha 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 ha." Kind of dumb, kind of harmless, until you tried to leave. The moment you hit the X, the page multiplied. One window became several, then dozens. They bounced all over your screen, making them nearly impossible to close. Every time you tried to get rid of one, more would appear. Even keyboard shortcuts like Control plus F4 just created more pop-ups. Your computer would start slowing down fast. The mouse lagged, the audio looped endlessly, and the number of windows kept growing until your system couldn't handle it anymore. Eventually, everything froze, and your only option was to hold down the power button and force your computer off. I remember thinking I completely broke my laptop when this happened, but after turning it back on, everything was fine. And that's the key thing. It wasn't actually a real virus. It didn't spread, infect files, or destroy your hard drive. It just overwhelmed your browser so badly that it felt like your computer was dying. That said, it wasn't harmless. If you had unsaved work, it was probably gone. And on older computers, it could completely lock things up. There are rumors of more malicious versions, but the original was mostly just a chaotic prank. Still, it became legendary, not because it was the most dangerous, but because it was so memorable. Today, it doesn't really work anymore. Modern browsers block pop-ups, restrict JavaScript, and Flash is gone entirely. But if you experienced it back then, you probably still remember the chaos, and that voice repeating over and over, "You are an idiot."
You are an idiot!